So this section essentially deals with the internet and the World Wide Web. It's different to the networking section because the networking section deals largely with the nitty-gritty of local area networks and networks in general. This deals specifically with the internet and the World Wide Web. Now, the internet is not just the World Wide Web. Okay, the World Wide Web is one particular service on the internet. Other services obviously include mail, voice over IP, all sorts of other services like BitTorrents and the like. So whenever you refer to the internet, you really are referring to the worldwide network of computers which provide various services to those connected to the network. And this does largely revolve around the World Wide Web, this particular chapter. And what it starts off doing is looking at an overview of how the internet has developed up until this stage. And they usually use the terminology Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Now, the essential difference between all of those is the user's role in the creation of content on the internet. So back in the day when the internet first started, we pretty much had what we call a static web. So the people in the know and used to need to have quite a lot of kind of technical expertise in order to create a web page and to put something on the internet. And people who did that put up their websites, and you as the user could surf the internet and look at static web pages. And those web pages only really changed if the person who owned the website or the web author changed something on those websites. So they would go and change the HTML code, and that would reflect something new. There were things like forums, and you could kind of comment on things like that, but it really was just static. It was almost near impossible to upload your own content. So then we moved on to Web 2.0, and that is pretty much occurred, I'd say probably about 10 years ago, where you could start contributing to the content on the internet. So that's when things like YouTube and Facebook and MySpace and various other social networks started cropping up. And as a user of the website, you were able to start creating content to publish on those websites. So if you take Wikipedia, for example, the people who own Wikipedia don't really publish anything on Wikipedia. They require users to publish content there. So a lot of your new modern websites really do provide a platform for you to create your own content. And then Web 3.0 is where the internet is currently going. It's in a transition phase from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. And Web 3.0 is all about a personalized internet. It's about a lot of machine learning is used, and it's essentially used to personalize your experience of the internet with personalized search results, and all of your interconnected platforms that you use, and you're able to publish on a number of different platforms. Your internet knows you in terms of your geographical location, your likes, your dislikes, your habits, and you are served up with pages or content which particularly revolve around what you want to see. So you've kind of got an idea of Web 1.0 in this diagram over here. We've got our HTML pages and our server side where all of the content is hosted, and it goes through the internet, and the content consumers instead of the content creators. So when we talk about a content creator, we talk about the people who create the stuff on the internet, and that used to be kind of very tech savvy people or big businesses which created content, and that was just served to the content consumers in kind of one directional. So you can see all the arrows go to the content consumers, and those go to the computers. You did have some kind of bi-directional communication where you could send emails or upload an HTML page, which was still quite difficult in the Web 1.0 kind of framework. And generally, you were just consuming that content over relatively slow internet connections. We then came to Web 2.0, which is what I was explaining to you just now, and there were kind of fast and efficient ways to consume content. And mobile devices came into play there, and it was really not really characterized by faster connections, but it really came about as a result of the increase in technology when it came to connection speeds. So what we had was, and you can see these bi-directional arrows, you still needed hosting services, and there were big companies or big pages like Wikipedia and Facebook, like I said, which provided platforms for sharing content. So they were the facilitators of content sharing. But you can see clearly the bi-directional arrows where content creators or content sharers started being able to upload and share their content on the internet using those various platforms. And then Web 3.0 is, like I said, the unique internet for your own uses. So it created a unique profile or digital footprint for every user on the internet, where you were allowed to kind of see the web in a way that that suited you or was personalized to your habits. Now, this diagram is quite interesting because it looks at how e-commerce kind of changed with all of those different technologies. So if you have a look at Web 1.0, everyone got connected to the internet. E-commerce was really just this is what we have to offer. And there were static portals and displayed advertising, and you may be able to order something off the internet, but it certainly wouldn't keep track of like your past purchases or recommend things to you. So Web 2.0, which is pretty much today, we're actually in the intersection between Web 2.0 and 2.3. You were looking at being able to share content. Your e-commerce was really recommendations. People who bought this also bought this. You could have dynamically placed ads which had context with the product that you were looking at. And then Web 3.0 is you were receiving the right content at the right time in order to alert you to things you may want to buy or purchase. So based on your previous history of purchases, Web 3.0 will really recommend things to you which you might be interested in. You also get personalized ads based on what you've been emailing about or what you bought recently, and that is exactly the characteristic of Web 3.0. It tries to personalize it to your particular use of the internet. Now, what's quite important is to understand, and this I think is one of the more useful sections of this particular chapter, and that discusses how programming happens on the internet. And you would have had some experience of that when you did HTML last year, but essentially this diagram at the top is quite an important one, because this is the machine that you're using to browse the internet, and this is the machine which is hosting the web page. Now, there are millions and millions of web servers throughout the world. Some are local to networks, some are external, some are run by ISPs, but essentially there's a web page which needs to be retrieved from the server, loaded onto your onto your computer that you're surfing with, and as soon as you click a hyperlink, there is new content which is drawn from the web server to your computer, which you can then interact with. And that has changed quite considerably with the development of the web. So initially in Web 1.0, there would be an HTML page which was on the server. When you visited a web page, you would get a copy of that HTML loaded onto your computer, and when you clicked a hyperlink, there would be another HTML page retrieved from the server which it would then be displayed. And the only way that you could really get extra data from the computer was requesting an image or an extra HTML page. And then we moved on to scripting, and this is where it gets really interesting. So scripting is essentially a set of instructions, and you can have client-side scripting and server-side scripting. So an example of a script would be JavaScript. And JavaScript can operate on the client's machine. So in other words, the machine that you're surfing from. And your server-side scripting is something like PHP. So what happens with client-side scripting is, along with the web page that you recommend or that you request from the web server, comes a JavaScript file along with that. And what that JavaScript file does is it allows certain things to happen on the web page on your computer. Okay, so for instance, if you click a little plus in the corner of something, it may expand that content. Now that content was always there. It was retrieved initially from the server in the first place. It's just hidden on your client machine. So for example, when you surf some news websites, you'll see that it gives you a little bit of the article, and then there's a button at the bottom that says read more, and that expands the rest of the article. Have you all seen that? So essentially that content was all loaded from the server to your computer, the machine or the computing device that you're surfing on, but some JavaScript happens there that when you click read more, it just shows you that content without retrieving it from the server again. And that's quite useful, because it puts more of the demand on the client, on the computer that's serving, or rather that's recommending the web page, and it's not putting too much strain on the server to have to retrieve pages all the time. You also had things like, little clocks or timers, and it was essentially some programming that the browser could execute without having to go back to the server. So you could choose your font size or your color or whatever, and JavaScript could do all of that within the browser. So here we have a diagram. You can see the client recommends some information from the web server. The web server returns that to the client. There's then some kind of script interpreter which manipulates the web page or the content in some way, and then the client sees that after the manipulation. And they can interact with that script on a continuous basis, but sometimes then you'll click a link and it will need extra information returned from the web server, which once again can be manipulated by the user. Okay, so one of the things that, in other words, scripting can do is error checking. So if you type in an email address that's not valid, instead of sending that to the server validates it and sends a response back. In client-side scripting, we really can have your web browser, by using JavaScript, to see whether that's a valid email address without having to communicate with the web server. So all of that will happen on the client. And when I talk about a client, I'm talking about a computing device that you're using. So the web browser is usually the piece of software which runs that scripting. We then have server-side scripting, which is very widely used. And server-side scripting is different from just static HTML pages, in that you might request a web page from the server, but you might give that server some very particular information. So let's say when you log into a website, you send your username and password to the web server, and using that username and password, it dynamically constructs a web page which is your profile. So when you log into Facebook, you give it its username and password, it gets sent to the server, and the page that is returned to you is your newsfeed. Okay? It's not just a static page that everyone gets the same thing. It has your newsfeed on with your login name, your settings, the friends that you follow. So it constructs an HTML page using a programming language, a scripting language like PHP or ASP or JSP, which are all based on the server. So these scripting languages run on the server. and it takes the information that you send to the web server and it generates a page just for you. Okay, with your particular content on and things that relate to you. So another example is when you click add to cart on an e-commerce site, that data gets sent to the web server. It generates an HTML page specifically for that item and your cart, and then sends back a web page tailored to what you're currently doing on that website. So that is incredibly useful. And here's an example of that. You'll get your client that makes a request from the web server. The web server will then take the script page, interpret the script, output an HTML page, and then give it back to the client. So you're not getting static web pages like on a news website. Because on a news website, if you click international news, you're going to see the international news that everyone else sees. Okay, you might be logged in, and you may get a few differences there, but generally you're getting the web page that everyone else will get. Yeah, you send some information to the web server, it generates an HTML page using scripting, which is tailored to whatever you're doing on the web page at the time, and sends it back from the client. Now, in reality, what we're using these days for the most part is a combination of client-side and server-side scripting. And this is where the web is at this moment in time. And Facebook is a perfect example of that. So if I go to my Facebook page, what happens immediately over here, you can see it's my wedding anniversary today, is what has happened over here is this page has been generated by the server. So it sent a whole bunch of information to the server, and it has sent back this web page to me. Okay? And what I can do now is, if I find a page which has comments on already, let me just see. So for instance, over here, if I want to see who liked this particular page, if I click here, you'll notice that this page doesn't change. I'm still surfing the same page that I had initially, but what I can do over here, if I click here, this data is retrieved from the server. So what happened was there was a little bit of client-side scripting which said that I need to, wow, things are really happening on this page at the moment. Okay, let me just mute this. So what happened over there, when I clicked that link, the client, my web browser, sent a request to the server and said, just send me the data that I need to display as to who's reacted to this particular link. Yes? And it sent that data back, and the browser rendered that data. I didn't get a whole new page. I just got a list of information of friends or people who liked that post. Okay, so that was client-side scripting. However, if I go to, for instance, my settings, okay, that loaded a new page. So that requested a page from the server, which the server then returned, okay, dynamically still using scripting because these are my settings. Okay, but it returned that to me, and it's showing that to me. So that was an example of a server-side script which happened. Let's see if I can find something. So that once again retrieved from the server. I don't think there's going to be any server-side or client-side scripting active here, but there are certainly. So for instance, if I go home again, and I have a look at this over here, and I comment on this. What is this about? I don't even remember. Okay, this is about student protests, so I can go, wow, hectic. Okay. Now when I press enter, a script, a client script, okay, is going to send that to the server. The server is then going to send a response back to to say, cool, you posted that successfully. I'm not retrieving a whole new page. I can also go, wow, okay? Client script sends that to the server. Okay, but there is still a proper client-server relationship happening there, which is why they call it the combination of client and server side. Because there's some client scripts which are active, which are communicating to the server, and there are others where I'm getting a whole page from the server. Now, that process of getting small pieces of information that the client requests from the server back to the client, and the client just incorporates that into the page that we are using, is called AJAX. Okay? It's asynchronous JavaScript kind of scripting. And that is very widely used because for a lot of the time we don't need to re-render the whole page from the server. It's often enough that we just get the piece of information that we're looking for from the server and back to the client, and the client script will know what to do with it in that case. So you can see over here the image is not very big, but we have a client over here which is our web browser, and we request information from the server, and we just change that piece of the web page using that. Okay. Cookies is another very important part, and cookies allows our computer to store some information. So one of my favorite and most simple examples of this is the SAA website. South African web page. So if I skip all the ads and go to Fly SAA, okay, wonder if it's going to ask me. It's not. But if I click up here and I go to cookies, I can see there are 12 cookies from this site. Okay, and if I look at the cookies here, you will see I can get a good idea of those cookies. What I'm going to do though is I am going to remove cookies from that, and you can see if I revisit this page, one of the things that it should ask me, let's do this, okay, English. So if I set that to English, okay, it will store that information in a cookie. Now, a cookie is a small piece of information which is stored on your computer by your browser, so that the next time I visit that web page, it will store that information as a cookie. Okay, so that I won't need to select that again if I say English over there. Next time it's going to remember that using a cookie. So if I put it into Italian, for instance, okay, and I visit that web page again in this browser, it will remember that I chose Italian. Okay, and I can go back to English. So what happens when you visit this web page? This web page requests this cookie, which we can see over here. Okay, you can see Fly SAA. And it can request that cookie. And it can say, okay, these are the settings that were set the last time. You see here's local storage, okay, here's session storage, whatever it's storing for that particular session, etc., etc. Okay, so we can see the cookies that are stored when we visit that web page. It doesn't allow websites to do malicious things. Okay, so cookies aren't 100% safe, but they are pretty safe. Okay, so that is essentially cookies and how they work. The rest of this chapter goes on about a lot of your multimedia technologies which are used on the internet. So we know that we can get a whole bunch of different content. We can get videos, we can get images, we can get sound, we can get streaming, we can get flash animations on web pages. And all of those are served with a MIME type, which is Multimedia Internet Mail Extension. And those MIME types can differ. And they really are set by the server and that helps your browser to understand what is going on there. But we do need some additional software in our browser to be able to handle some of those multimedia types. And one of them is plugins. So a lot of you will have an Adobe plugin for your browser, which allows you to view PDF web pages when you're surfing the internet. The Adobe Shockwave player, which allows you to view flash animations, is a plugin. So there are a whole range of plugins which allow you to view particular images. Media players, have you ever been onto a web page and you say you can't play this media, you need this plugin? A plugin is an extra little piece of software which you can install in your browser which allows you to view that particular content. So it really is an extension to your browser. There are other types of things which you can do, and podcasts is one of them. Often you don't, a lot of the plugins are built in for this to browsers, but you can essentially download a podcast. Then it gets to something quite important, which is downloading versus streaming. And there's often a question as to which is better. Okay, so let's say, for instance, is it better to download a YouTube video or to stream it at home? Well, at home, it's probably just better to stream it. Okay, the chances of you watching it are slim to none. However, if it's on a network like we have at school, it would often be better to download that and make it available for other people. Okay, or if it's something you're going to watch again, like a video lecture or whatever, you'd probably download it because you're going to watch it again and again. That takes bandwidth once. Streaming takes bandwidth a number of times. Every time you watch it, it's going to stream again. Now, obviously, with some live content, if you're watching something live on the internet, it's obviously you're going to have to stream it. So you can stream audio and video. Obviously, YouTube, you've used SoundCloud. That should all be pretty simple to you. Okay, we've got video on demand, which you should be familiar with, Showmax and Netflix, which is really, you say, I want this right now, and I want to watch it right now, and what it does is it sends that data to you, and you stream a movie, or you stream music, or whatever the case may be. VoIP we've spoken about briefly, but essentially that is communicating with someone with voice and or video directly over the internet. And that's incredibly useful because you can use your data to video conference with someone, which becomes incredibly useful instead of using your cell phone, which debatably costs more to speak to a person like that. So WhatsApp calling is obviously becoming quite popular. Skype is the most common VoIP provider, works really well, and it's a closed network for private users, so you have to be friends with someone on Skype.